To David Dunn, Professor of International Politics at the University of Birmingham. Really great to have you on, David. This is fascinating, isn't it? Because there's a certain philosophy that the president is pushing along with the hard facts of what the US needs to maintain its national security. How is it possible that the changing demographics of the Western world are part of US national security strategy? I don't get that.
Well, I think you're not alone in not getting that. What we see here extraordinarily is ethno-nationalism, the idea that you have to be a white person in Europe to be a European. The idea that they're going to be non-Europeans. It means non-white Christian people. So it's an extraordinary thing to put in a national security document, which just shows how much things have changed. What this document is more broadly is a rejection of the world that America has built in favour of a bunch of ideas that, from a very unusual, as you say, philosophy that dictates America's role in the world.
Does that mean that Donald Trump is rejecting the idea of the United States being a beacon of the free world and that it's almost everyone for themselves as long as he can protect American interests, everything else is secondary?
Well, I mean, from the very first words of this document that says, "My fellow Americans," the focus is on America and America first, and everybody else, you're left to get on with your own best way, more or less. He almost talks about there being spheres of influence. So long as we can have the corollary of the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America, so we can enforce our policies on drugs and on immigration and keeping foreign influence out of Latin America. He almost seems to be saying that other countries can have their sphere of influence too. So it's a 19th century idea, rejecting the lessons learned in the 20th century about how America needs to be engaged in the world to avoid world wars. It is a retreat from that vision. It is a retreat from the idea of America spreading its values around the world. It only criticizes Europe for being too liberal, and it says it won't criticize countries for not being democratic or for being liberal. So it's an odd document in a whole variety of ways, and it is a marked departure from traditional documents that the Pentagon has produced over the last 80 years, really.
This idea that he supports what he calls patriotic European parties. And we heard John, our North America correspondent, talk about J.D. Vance going to Germany to talk up the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland right-wing party. He's supporting the right-wing candidate in the Honduran election. He was threatening Argentinian voters with some kind of financial punishment if his friend Javier Milei didn't win the midterm elections. What does this mean for the outside world if the American president is pushing one particular philosophy at the expense of others, almost saying that if you don't follow my philosophy, you will suffer?
What this means is that the America of 2025 is very different from the America of the last 80 years. What we have been used to is a world order crafted on certain principles. They were consistent principles, they were liberal principles, they were legal principles. And what we have now is a regime, as we've seen in your last report of the attacks in the Pacific and in the Caribbean on ships without them being intercepted and treated legally, is a country that is embracing a militarist approach, a bullying approach, and that's true in trade and in a whole variety of other areas, and is advancing its ideological allies. So you have at the one time you have criticism of drugs policy in Latin America, and yet and pressure on Venezuela at the same time as you let out the Honduran former leader who out of prison, who is let out because he's a friend of Trump and he's a right-wing person who matches Trump ideologically. So any idea of consistency, any idea of the rule of law being applied here is out the window, and in a presidency and in America now that is highly ideological and pursues its foreign policy in those terms.
David, it's only a 4-year term. Maybe one person can't change the entire world in 4 years. But how important is the MAGA movement to the Republican Party now? If indeed it's the core of the Republican Party and the next Republican president is a MAGA supporter, then we could be looking at a transition over years of American foreign policy changes in the way Washington regards its place in the world. Would that be fair?
I think the important thing to grasp here is that for 80 years we have had a bipartisan consensus on what America's role in the world, the need for America to be committed in order to preserve the peace of the world. What the phenomenon of Donald Trump has done is to break that foreign policy consensus and to bring to power a bunch of individuals, and this clearly has the handprint of J.D. Vance and Sullivan, the National Security, the Deputy Chief of Staff in this. And what that is a new set of ideas that have always been there in American politics, but they've been a periphery. And now they are centre stage, and now that consensus is broken. Whether that consensus can be rebuilt is another matter entirely, because what we have now is a fractured, dysfunctional American political system, and we're seeing the manifestation of that in this document.
David, really always appreciate the analysis. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
And you.